Ladies and gentlemen, we call this meeting to order, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners for January 14th, 2024. Can I get the roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Braun? Commissioner Kleiner?
Here.
Commissioner Pearson?
Here.
Commissioner Warnick?
Here.
Let the record show you have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you rise to the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Bow your heads with me for a brief prayer. Father God, I come to you tonight on behalf of our town, Lord. I ask that you watch over our citizens. I ask that you watch over our elected body and their families, Lord, as we continue to serve the people. Please watch over our staff and our police department, as well as the troops serving here and overseas. In Jesus' name, amen. Right. Moving forward into the consent agenda, which is before you. Town Administrator, do you have any comments regarding the consent agenda?
Yes, before we do that, I just wanted to make sure that we let the audience know that Commissioner Pearson is here virtually,
Perfect.
so if they tuned in. A couple items on the consent agenda. Obviously, I'm going to jump to E, upcoming town meetings. That's pretty self-explanatory there. You had the approval of the December 23rd, 2024 town meeting video summary. And then you have 3 resolutions in front of you, of which I want to give you a quick overview of those. And again, if there's any of these that you don't want to vote for, someone can make a motion to pull it out of the consent agenda, and then it would be dealt with under public presentations by itself. If you didn't want to vote for a particular resolution, you can pull it out. Otherwise, you're going to have one vote for the consent agenda in its entirety. So, Resolution 2025-01, East Cherry Street, that is essentially a resolution to once again try to deal with parking issues that we are having on East Cherry Street. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, we made an effort to try to regulate it as parking for no more than 2 hours at a time. I don't think there's anybody in this room that hasn't received complaints from residents and businesses that have been complaining about Cherry Street being shut down completely because of some really blatant parking violations in there. When you look at the road in itself, it's really not wide enough to support parking on both sides. And given the actual layout of, for instance, the Ford Funeral Home, given that it is all a depressed curve in a large part of the area, meaning that you can't park in front of that, you can really only park in front of the residential homes on the Upper East Side, which gets you way out into the middle of the road, or you park down where Cherry Street intersects at Queen Street, and that's where a lot of the root of the problem is happening at, is because we're getting people that are parking right down in that area and creating a very restrictive cattle chute, so to speak, that not only doesn't allow people to go from east to west on Cherry Street to get out, but it creates a problems of near accidents right at the intersection of Cherry and Queen Street. So this is going to propose that there be no parking permitted, period, on East Cherry Street. And then to also, it goes further to make sure that we are adding ample signage on what would be South Walnut Street to make sure that there's no parking there. Chief, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, one of the main issues we've seen is the road width is not friendly enough for a fire engine, a school bus, or a delivery truck to get through while passing another vehicle, which creates a bottleneck into the intersection of, could be along Main Street or the intersection of Cherry and Queen. So trying to reduce the number of vehicles on that roadway at one given time can easily facilitate emergency vehicles when necessary. So that's one of the main concerns that I have, along with the fact that the number of citations we've written, the individuals just pay them and continue to park.
I might add one thing to that. We are also, this resolution is taking into account an exception for short-term deliveries to local businesses too. So as long as a fuel oil delivery or deliveries to any of the restaurants on Main Street, because the delivery trucks, it's not safe or they're not able to make deliveries out on Main Street, they will be able to temporarily stop on East Cherry Street to make their deliveries that way. So that's one resolution.
Calvin,
Yeah,
will the signage show that parking for 10 minutes or so?
yeah, the
What
short answer,
signage are you gonna put up?
yes, the short answer is the chief and Josh and I are gonna work on verbiage that's recognized verbiage that no parking anytime with the exception of short-term deliveries. Things along those lines. So we were gonna work that out as an administrative staff to make that work.
The only question,
Okay,
the only question I have is, can we, I would assume we're gonna give them a heads up on when this is gonna start, you know?
Yes.
So that we're not ticketing immediately.
Correct.
So we're, okay.
If you guys wanted to, advise us, do you want 30 days advance notice, 20 days, whatever?
Probably 30.
Yeah,
I say we go with 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
typically we do build in a educational period, 2 weeks to 30 days, and notification of the public right there in that area.
Well, it's not a surprise that we've continued to have issues, you know? Like, we attempted to find a happy medium by doing the 2-hour parking, and it just didn't work out. You know, so I mean, it's not a surprise that we're doing this. So I don't necessarily disagree with Commissioner Pearson that 2 weeks should be enough
Neither do
because
I.
Okay.
And for everybody's benefit too, a thought comes to mind. Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, you are limited on how high a fine can be for a violation of like 2-hour parking.
Correct.
So if anyone sitting here says, if anybody in the audience might have the question of, well, why don't you just make the fine really high? You're not permitted to by law, is my understanding. Is that correct?
There is a limit, and it's governed by statute,
Right.
what they can be.
And so by going to no parking, period, because of the public safety aspect, that allows you to tow and to forgo issuing a small citation that they're just gonna pay like you suggested and continue to park there. And just look at it as the cost of doing business by paying a 25, 30, whatever it is, fine. Whereas now, because of the public safety aspect of it, you would be able to tow the vehicle.
Yes, we can make it that no parking tow-away zone.
Yeah, okay. The other resolution that you have is a resolution that we do from time to time as some of our equipment ages out. In this particular case, we're talking about a variety of vehicles that are no longer needed for the town. It's Resolution 2025-02. I'll skip the boilerplate. Whereas the town instituted a vehicle replacement program 15 years ago and has maintained that program over the years in an effort to promote greater fuel efficiency and reduce energy consumption, ensure the safety and reliability of municipal vehicles through the use of modern vehicle technologies and safety features, minimize maintenance and operational costs associated with an aging vehicle fleet, encourage the adoption of cleaner and more sustainable transportation options within the community, and to realize a return on resale of the vehicles while they still retain value. And whereas the town has recently replaced several vehicles and now has a surplus of vehicles in storage, and the mayor and commissioners have determined that the below listed vehicles are no longer needed by the town and are hereby declared surplus vehicles. And basically what you have here is 9 vehicles ranging from 2010 Dodge Chargers, 2011 Dodge Charger, 2011 Ford Expedition, 2016 Ford Interceptor, 2016 Ford Interceptor, 2017 Ford Explorer, 2019 Ford Interceptor, and then two 2006 Chevy pickup trucks. So once you declare this, we will wait 20 days, and then the town will be in a position to liquidate these vehicles either through private sale, public bid, or auction at the conclusion of the 20 days. So that is that resolution. The last resolution that you have.
I'd like to remove 03 from the consent agenda.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, I'll do the presentation under the public presentation.
Yeah, there's some, I already found some typos and stuff. I just
Alright.
wanna,
Okay.
not big stuff, just get it hammered out, and since that requires discussion.
Do I need to take a vote on that to remove it? Or are we good?
No, you don't have to for
No,
consent.
you don't have to take a
So
vote.
I make a
to move it.
motion to approve the consent agenda without item D.
Perfect. Is there a second?
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Just for clarification, Augie, we are removing section D from the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Perfect.
Okay.
All right. Public presentations.
Do you wanna do the personnel manual one first, since that was up above that? Just
Yeah, that's
move
fine.
straight down.
Yeah.
So I found, so on page 17, we updated the word "to" to spelling it T-O-O, but it was already correct. T-O is the proper use of "to" in that sentence.
Let me catch up to you. All right, so on what page are you on?
17.
Okay.
Oh, too closely.
Shall be too closely observed,
Yeah.
not like also or excessively close. It's
Yeah.
too close. So the closely is on observe, so it should be think of it as to observe is the sentence structure. Got 'em, breaking out like high
Okay.
school English here.
It's all good.
I was still going through.
Commissioner Warnick,
Yeah,
is this something that you see potentially approving with
Yeah,
the
yeah.
changes?
Yeah.
Do you want me to go through the changes and then you can follow up at the end with
Yeah.
any punctuation stuff
Yeah, I'm
you
fine with
want? That'll give you a little bit more time to track them.
yeah.
So, essentially what we're doing here is, and let me go back to the resolution itself, because we technically have to read that in. Basically what we're saying, what we have said before, is the personnel manual is a rather old document, and over the years, we have tried to amend it and update it where necessary. And you are correct, the original documents were loaded with a lot of run-on sentences, bad punctuation, and sentences that ended without having a thought, so to speak. So we've, instead of, trying to do the whole thing at one time, we've cleaned it up to a great deal. So basically, in skipping all the boilerplate stuff that basically says you have the authority to create a personnel manual, the fourth whereas talks about it being over 20 years of age. We have identified some discrepancies in the pay for work on holidays or call-in pay. In our personnel manual, it was very obscure, but we found language that was confusing because on one hand, the document said we would pay employees either scheduled to work on a holiday or called in to work on a holiday at time and a half. And another section of the document, we had said they would be paid double time, which can be a little bit more typical, and it's not something you have to do under the Fair Labor Standards Act, but you have the option to do that. So that was one of the major changes here. The other thing that we're looking to do on the next whereas is the administration is embracing the common sense approach of developing a policy for flex time as opposed to having employees use personal time in excess of what is really needed for the personal activity that they must attend to. So basically what we're saying here is that, as you can appreciate, when you're trying to track employee leave time, I'm not suggesting that doing the mathematical calculation is insurmountable. Clearly it is. But when you have employees that, and in the past, the town has had a policy that you had to take personal or vacation time. Originally, at one time, it was 4-hour increments, and then we had dropped it down to 2-hour increments, all because there could be a situation where we have employees that have young children. There's a delay in school opening, and they need 20 minutes or an hour to tend for that. The idea here is, on one hand, you're forcing the employee to use a larger chunk of time for that because you're saying you have to take it in 2-hour or 4-hour increments, and maybe all they need is 20 minutes to handle what they're handling. So on one hand, you would look at it is you're having the employee take more time, but from the perspective of a productivity and standpoint from the town, you're losing that employee for a longer period of time than what is necessary to lose that employee. So the idea is that if an employee has to stop to get blood work on the way to work, or they have to take their kid to the school bus, or whatever those little small increments are, they call their supervisor ahead of time, get permission for it, they take that time, but then they have to make that time up in the same pay period in which that was requested. So there's no real accounting that you have to deduct 47 minutes from somebody's employee time and then track that through the remaining 12 months. So it just makes sense to introduce a common sense approach to flex time. The other thing is that we issued fuel cards, if you remember, in the past, and we had that delineated in the fiscal policy, but we really didn't have the teeth that's needed for it to be in the personnel manual in terms of if an employee abuses that. So this manual update is also addressing the fuel cards that are issued for employees that are assigned vehicles. And then the last item is, we didn't do a deep dive into our sexual harassment policies or other types of policies, and probably in the future we might want to do that, but we did find some ambiguity in terms of what the supervisor's responsibility is to do with those types of complaints. So we put a little bit more clarity in that. So what I'd like to do is I'll go through I'll highlight some of these sections. As Commissioner Warnick had identified, there was also some punctuation changes that were identified. Unfortunately, there was a mistake made on the proper spelling of "to" or the proper context desired in that. You can see where I'm just going on page 11. We're changing the spelling of assure to ensure to meet its proper intent. And we're sort of cleaning up some of the language of all necessary action instead of any action. And we're adding some, we're making it a little bit more clear that we're talking about from potential harm from substance abuse, as opposed to the way it had been worded. So as you go through this, you see there's a lot of just changing and clarifying some of the sentence structure. And it's not until we get down to the salary of new employees is one. We've always had language about how the salaries are determined for new employees, whether it be in our charter or our town code about who is the personnel officer for the town and the town budget. We're sort of clarifying that all out to meet what we do now. In other words, when we approve a budget every year, part of that budget is essentially a salary structure. And so we build the budget to have some flexibility in that salary structure, whereas we might aim high in the budget process, but maybe we get an employee that doesn't quite have all the credentials and training that we want or expertise, so we can make it, we can offer a salary less. However, we might get somebody that's really, really good in that situation. We would have the ability to hire that employee, and the elected body would have the ability to come back and say, well, wait a minute, we don't want to violate that previously set salary structure. So that's basically what we're doing in that area. And as you can see, there was already language that talked about that, but it was a little ambiguous of how it was structured. The other thing that we have done, which we always try to do, the original writers of a lot of our documents would have conceptual language that was buried in a paragraph, and if you were saying, I think it's written somewhere, you would have to read virtually all the paragraphs. So we've introduced titles to certain paragraphs so the reader is able to see what was contained in that policy. Then we get into the overtime compensation, and although, and I'm just going to give you an example of item B on page 20 for full-time police. Under the Fair Labor Standards Act, police officers are not treated the same way regular employees are in terms of the number of hours they must work before they get paid overtime. We're not making any change to that, but it used to just say, it said 1.5 times for each hour worked over 42 hours. We want to make sure that we're saying 42 hours and a period of 7 consecutive 24-hour periods, which is a work week, which is what the Fair Labor Standards Act defines as a work week. So we wanted to get rid of some of that ambiguity. So we're not really changing the timing on that, because in this particular section, we're talking just strictly about regular overtime. You can see where we're referring to anything that applies to holiday pay to go to a section in the personnel policy that addresses that. You can see again a couple titles here that are not changing anything. I wanted to make sure that we clarified what the exception was. So if you read item E, it says employees whose standard work week is less than 40 hours will be compensated at the regular rate of pay for hours worked between the normal hours scheduled for the work week and 40 hours. Any hours of work in excess of 40 hours shall be paid at an overtime rate as noted in item A above. This is basically dealing with part-time employees. And what we started doing this past year, because we essentially got our first part-time employee in about 10 years, since the last time we had a part-time employee is some of the clerical help that was in the police department. So what we're recommending is that if you're going to take a part-time employee and ask them to work 10, 12, 14 hours at Sunfest or Winterfest or Spooktacular, it might make sense to allow them to get paid overtime for that. Now, if an employee is working, let's say an employee works 26 hours a week, and let's say in our Public Works Department, there's a water main break that requires them to work 5 additional hours, they don't get overtime because it's not above and beyond the 40-hour work week. However, if it's a pre-scheduled event where we're looking at tracking a lot of hours, we might have a hard time getting that employee to want to come out and help us, and we all know how much we need extra hands. And so it becomes an issue of everybody else is getting paid time and a half for that time, except for that part-time employee that we've asked to come out and give 8, 10, 12, 14 hours of their time. So that's what we're addressing in that particular item here. And I want to jump down to holiday pay on page 22. That's where we're basically saying that all non-exempt employees shall be compensated at a rate of 2 times the regular rate of pay for each hour worked during the holidays defined in C below. So this is where we're saying if somebody has to work Christmas or gets called in, they're going to be paid double time as opposed to time and a half. That's how we're suggesting we alleviate or mitigate the contradiction that was previously in the personnel manual, where it said in one area time and a half and the other area double time. We've always had language in here about what defines holiday pay, especially although all of our regular employees basically, they don't typically have an overlap, but you do have police officers that work 12-hour shifts. We're basically saying that if a police officer starts at 10 o'clock on a particular night, those first 2 hours would be at the regular pay, but the holiday basically kicks in at 12:01 midnight. So the remaining 10 hours would be paid at double time because now their shift has gone into what we consider to be holiday. So that's always been in the document. We just brought it down into this holiday pay area to have everything listed at the same time. The other significant area that we addressed, and I want to jump to that real quick, is, see if I can get it here quickly, is call-in time. And to get to call-in time, we jump down, and let me back up for a second and say we added a new section 6-18 to talk about virtual work from outside of town hall. And that covers us for, especially with the recent fuel oil spill that we have. Our staff, led by Judy and the staff, has done a great job of getting a lot of virtual and online ability to be able to continue to operate business if we have a snow day, or in the case of the fuel oil spill in the building, we could transition into virtual work and not miss a beat in providing services. So we're basically creating language about virtual work from outside of town hall. We're basically saying that an employee can be required to work virtually if it's for inclement weather, building deficiencies, example, power outages, HVAC, or acts of God such as natural disasters, whatever. To be quite frank, one of the reasons why I felt it was important to do that is that in the past, before we really got our heads wrapped around virtual work, we would allow the staff to get off on a snow day, but yet our public works employees and police were still intended to come in. Now, some agencies will view that as, priority employees. We're not really large enough that I don't think that now that we have virtual capability that our staff would be able to continue to work virtually. So that's what we added there. 619 is the policy I talked about for flex time, and that's basically setting some rules and regulations for an employee to be able to work flex time. I didn't.
Calvin, on that section,
Yeah.
there's a process here for request.
Yes.
They have to submit a flex relief request form to their supervisor, Brian. And I'm wondering if, in the scenario you gave where it's a snow day at 8 o'clock in the morning, they have to fill out a form and send it to you before. Like I'm just trying to figure the mechanisms for that. Is that something?
So here's the way I would look at it administratively. A snow day is a little bit different than the Monday morning and
Yeah.
your kid missed the school bus.
Yeah.
Essentially what we're saying is, and it's what we do quite often, is make a phone call to your supervisor, because at the end of the day, the supervisor has to approve that, and then we catch up the paperwork later on. So for accounting purposes and auditing purposes, when the auditor looks at time cards and sees a variation, we have a piece of paper that backs up that.
Okay.
So that's what the intent is in that particular case. For the purposes of time, I might have glossed over it, but we also address call-in time. And there's a section in our personnel manual that talks about call-in time. And the only employees that are really subject to call-in time are public works employees. And basically what we're saying is that if we're gonna say an employee that works on a holiday should get paid double time, then the call-in time should reflect that also. If they're enjoying Christmas or Thanksgiving with their family and we have a water main break and we're calling them in, they should get paid at double time for that. Now, the reason why that is called out separately is because there are times when the public works might be called in to handle a 20-minute to an hour-long thing. And in order to make sure that we always have coverage, we give that employee the perk of getting paid for 4 hours of regular time, regardless of the amount of time they work, as compensation for them agreeing to be on call. And the on-call rotates from week to week, of which employee knows I can't travel out of state because I'm on call and I have to provide the coverage. So we give them 4 hours. However, under the time and a half, if they work more than 2.75 hours during that call-in, then they get paid at an overtime rate of time and a half, because overtime at 2.76 is greater than 4 hours of straight call time. So when we started talking about giving the employee double time for a holiday, we had to account for that. So essentially, if an employee comes in on a holiday and works more than 2 hours, they're not going to get 4 hours of call time. They would get 2 hours of double time because that's the greater. So if they work 2.1 hours, they're going to get paid at double time because that's greater than the regular time. So I know it's a lot to digest. That's what we have in front of you now. If you want to look at it further, you could table it until the next meeting, or if you're comfortable with it, you can consider voting for it.
Could I ask one question?
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure that I understand how it's going to calculate when we're doing the accounting for it. So we have holiday, they get paid 8 hours regular pay for holiday. That person that's coming in or gets called in then is going to get double time. So they would get double time for the overtime and their holiday pay.
So let me break your question up this way. If it's Christmas and one of the police officers has to work 12 hours that entire day, they're going to get paid double time for that 12 hours. If one of our public works guys who has to come in for the 2-hour shift that we do on days when town hall is closed, they're going to get paid double time for that 2 hours that they worked. I want to make sure we're clear. It's the call-in that gets interesting. So if the employee came in the morning, a public works employee came in on Christmas and worked their normal 2-hour shift, they're going to get double time for that 2 hours. They go home and then they get called back in. They'll get paid 4 hours of regular time unless it requires them to work more than double time, or more than 2 hours. At that point, they would get paid double time for that.
So
For whatever duration, if it's 3 hours, they get 6 hours pay, basically.
Yes.
So then is that
Makes
subtracted
sense.
from their holiday pay, or do they get their holiday pay as well?
They get their holiday pay as well, because
Okay.
they already worked that. That was part of their normal, they were coming in to do that anyway. This is the on-call portion which is separate, so like they come in, do the whatever.
The
check
2
the
hours.
meters, all that, they get paid double time for that, so 4 hours pay for that. And then a water main breaks 4 hours later, or 6 hours later, whatever. And they come back in, and they're here for, well, maybe not a water main breaks, because that's probably
Yeah.
gonna be a lot more people, but
Right.
something else happens, an event
Yeah.
happens, maybe like something, the park gets vandalized or
Yeah.
something, and they come in to clean that. If they're here for an hour, they're gonna get paid 4 hours. If they're here for 2 hours, they're gonna get paid 4 hours. But if they go over 2 hours, then they're gonna get paid double time for however long they're here.
I got that part, but what I'm saying is if you're already scheduled and you're gonna be paid 8 hours because it's a holiday, okay, so if you don't do anything, you've got holiday pay. Then you get called in, and we're saying that time that they're being called in is double time. So are they
Oh,
going to
so
be
the
paid
8
2
hours.
hours at double time?
Well, let me answer the question this way. If everybody gets paid their regular rate of pay on a holiday,
Okay,
one employee in Public Works has to come in for 2 hours. They're gonna get the regular 8-hour pay for the holiday, 2 hours for having to work, during that time,
at double time.
at double time.
Okay, that was my question.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the only question you guys, and it does raise an issue, do you want it where the 8 hours of regular time gets reduced or that, no, that wouldn't make sense. It would be double time on top of the 8 hours.
Okay, that was
Yeah.
my question. I just
Yeah.
want to be sure from an accounting standpoint.
Right.
All right, what's the board's pleasure? Do we want to, is there a motion to approve?
I make a motion to approve with the correction to the word "to" in section 4-402, on page 17, that the change from TO to TOO is incorrect and should have been kept TO. That's it.
Second?
I second.
Microphone.
He said second.
Sorry.
That was Augie.
Oh.
Yeah.
Did you have any comments, Commissioner Kleiner?
I see a spelling error for tenure, the word tenure on page 19. So I definitely approve with that.
Spell check?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Just
can,
any spell check changes. Yeah.
I would be okay with you guys approving the resolution with us knowing that we have to clean up any grammatical stuff without
Correct.
changing any context.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Any more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Passes. All right. Moving forward into, do you want to do introduction of ordinance 2025-01?
Yeah, this one is really simple because this is a zoning change. So basically what you would be doing would be having the boiler, a summary read into the minutes, and it's already went to the planning commission, so let's back up for a second. Changes to the zoning code can be initiated by one of two ways. The elected body can do it, and they have to send it to the planning commission for review under state law. The planning commission can initiate it and send it to you and say, here's our recommendation. In both cases, you just do a public advertisement to hold a public hearing. And so the planning commission already saw this ordinance last night. We've made some changes. They're putting it before you folks. You could, say, I want to make some changes now, or you can sit it over until we have the public hearing. And at the public hearing, changes can be, some minor changes can be made to it at that point. So I just want to make it clear, you don't have to send it to the planning commission because they've already looked at it here. So if you'd like, I'll give you a quick overview of what we're doing.
Please do.
All right, so you have, this basically is a change to the zoning code. And it's some big bites out of the zoning code, but it's fairly streamlined at the same time. And so what we're doing here is, one of the first changes is, and I'm gonna jump ahead here, section 3 on your ordinance of 3 of 18. The zoning code has all the definitions in Article 23. that is inconsistent from all of our other town structure of ordinances. So it makes sense that when you have an ordinance, to have uniformity in the way all the codes are written, in which in this case has all the definitions that are salient to a code section to be in Article 2. The other problem with our zoning code is other portions, other articles in the zoning code have what I call straggler definitions that you might not know that they're at the beginning of Article 15 because you made an assumption that they would be in Article 23. So what we're looking to do is move all the definitions that are in Article 23 to a newly created Article 2. In addition, we're going to go through the document, if approved, and lift all of the definitions that are throughout the document and put them into Article 2, so you have an alphabetical listing of all the definitions that are salient to the zoning code. In addition, if you were to approve this in the future, we're going to have the ability to go into the document and where it referenced, definitions as defined in Section 3 of this article would be redone to say definitions as defined in Article 2. So it's not, if we don't do it that way, we'll be coming before you with a very lengthy document just doing some rudimentary changes when it comes to definitions. So that's what the changes in Section 3 are doing. Then we're making some changes in Article 1 and Article 4. And so what I would like to do is jump down, because you have a red line version of this, and it starts on page 7. And basically, in the existing Article 1, all the intended changes are highlighted in red, and everything that's being deleted is strike through. Well, one of the first things, and we've always talked about this, is when our code was written, the state of Maryland, which gives us the authority to have a zoning code, had that in the Maryland COMAR regulations as Article 66B. Well, when the state totally redid and recodified the COMAR regulations, they reformatted everything, and the powers and duties of zoning and land development were taken, and Article 66B was eliminated, and a new document called the Land Use Article was put in there. And so we want to make sure that where we talk in Section 12101, that this code is enacted under the authority granted by the General Assembly of Maryland as provided in the land use article of the annotated code and as amended from time to time, not Article 66B. So there's a lot of elementary stuff going on here. Again, when you get to the first item number 1 in Section 12102, I'm just simply adding a title. So that, again, the paragraph jumps out at you to know whether or not you need to read it. And then I clean up the Article 66B again by putting land use. Number 2 is a title, number 3 is a title, and then number 4 and 5, or number 4 especially, is brought up because of another code section that basically what we are saying is that in number 4, it makes sense to identify when the original town zoning code was created. And we found that buried in the document. It was created in 1974. So we're just putting it right up here front and center because it's all part of the authority granted to the town. And then item number 5 here, we're just adding a title. And I did this for the Planning Commission last night, and I think it makes sense to do it for your benefit and anybody watching this. You're seeing the word recodification, and someone might say, well, what's the difference between a recodification and an amendment to a code? Because as you know, we make amendments all the time. Well, in this case, back in 2004, the town paid a company to come in and look at whatever that zoning code was back then and basically make changes, give those changes to the elected body at that time. The elected body would sign off on each one of those changes over one night, maybe over 2 or 3 years, I don't know. And then when all those changes were made, that third party would submit a document that recognized all those changes, and that is called a recodification. So if you think about it, what I said about what the state did is exactly the same thing. The state didn't necessarily go in and change the intent of the code. They just reformatted it and made some changes, but recodified it as a recodified annotated code. So that's all this, I wanted to make sure we all understood the difference between recodified and amendment. The other thing we've done is our code is always quietly talked about adequate public facilities. You can see as I scroll down to page 9, it always had insert an APFO draft ordinance here, but the town never had an APFO draft ordinance. It never adopted one. So we're not quite to where we're going to talk about what monies are required on an APFO, but we want to create the groundwork of conceptually what an APFO is. And essentially what that is if a developer comes in to develop a piece of property, they have to account for the impact of the property in the region. So we've always had the conversation about what is the impact on the schools. Well, we don't regulate that, the school district regulates that. So the developer would come in and say, this is going to generate X number of students, and they would have to show us from the school that there's adequate facilities. Otherwise, we have the right to say you can't go forward with your development. The same thing would apply to having to verify that there's enough sewer and water. And in those scenarios, if there isn't enough sewer and water, we could reject the development, or the developer could come back and say, well, what do we need to do to get adequate sewer and water? We will pay for that. And that's where your adequate public facilities comes in. So that's conceptually what that is doing. The other thing we wanted to do is clean up a little bit on the interpretation of certificates of occupancy. And this is what is contained in 106. And we have always required when somebody sells a commercial property or gets a new tenant or proprietor in a commercial property, they have to get a certificate of occupancy. And that certificate of occupancy is there to make sure that somebody's not opening up a business that's not permitted in that area. But the danger there is that if we just sign off on these things without going into the building, and they are public buildings, we run a liability risk of not realizing that all the electric was messed up and there were wires hanging out of the wall, or the emergency lighting was not working, or the fire sprinkler system was shut down for whatever reason. So before we're going to assume the liability of issuing a certificate of occupancy, we do an inspection. And we've been doing that for the past 17 years, but we wanted to make clear of what that intent is. So we're making it clear that this doesn't apply to single-family homes, meaning we're not saying when somebody sells their home they have to get an inspection. We're saying everything but a single-family home when it goes to get an inspection. There's a lot more self-explanatory stuff. Then when you get into Article 4, which is referenced as Document 2 in the resolution or the ordinance, we're adding some titles again and making it clear on how non-conforming uses are addressed. And let's for a second just talk quickly about what a non-conforming use is. There's two types of non-conforming uses. There's a legal non-conforming use and there's an illegal non-conforming use. And what that means is, if you remember that the town adopted its zoning code in 1974, the town's been around for 160 years. And so when people make a zoning code, you can have situations where the zoning code creates a situation where a property was operating before 1974, and instead of fragmenting your zoning code to deal with one property that's in nonconformance, you declare that a legal nonconforming use. And that legal nonconforming use can continue to operate as a legal nonconforming use as long as it doesn't extend what made it a legal nonconforming use. So the best way to describe that is we typically have a 35-foot height limit of all buildings in the town. As a curious fact, most communities in this country have a 35-foot limitation as a general rule of thumb, unless you're building high-rises. The 35-foot came from when the fire department started to get the handheld pumps. They were limited to no more than 35 feet. And so that's where the 35-foot originally came from, is because of the old horse-drawn, hand-pumped pumps for water. But in this case, someone that is at 40 feet and they're declared a non-conforming structure because they're 5 feet more than the 35-foot limit, they're not allowed to come back and say, well, let us go to 42 feet. We're already in non-compliance. What's another 2 feet? You're not allowed to do that. That's an example of extending it. And so that's what this goes on to talk about. And then it also deals with illegal non-conforming uses, in the sense that if we come across a property that since 1974 did something that is not legal for the zoning code because no one realized they did it, they're an illegal non-conforming use, and we have the authority to acquire that property to come into conformance. The fact that nobody knew they were doing it doesn't give them a grandfathering, so to speak. So that's what this language in here is doing. And then another very important piece I want to draw your attention to is how, and Augie, this will perk your interest, because we don't really have anything in our code that talks about what to do with buildings that are burned down or got blown over in a hurricane or an earthquake or whatever. How do you deal with structures, more particularly legal non-conforming structures? So the Planning Commission wanted to address this. So under item 1, it's basically saying this section applies to all structures, including those with non-conforming uses that are damaged or destroyed by fire, flood, explosion, or other catastrophic event. Item 2 is basically making no conceptual change, in that it's saying if you are a conforming structure, you can get your building permits and build back in the original footprint, to the original height, to the original lot coverage, because you're a conforming structure. But we're making it clear that you can do that. Now when you start to talk about non-conforming structures, communities deal with this a variety of different ways. And Commissioner Kleiner, as per our conversation last night, you remember that some communities say, well, if the building is burned down to 50 to 75%, if it's less than 50 to 75% of the value of the property prior to the damage being done, then you can build back in the original footprint. So let's say we have a building that's too close to the road to meet our zoning code. You could build back in that scenario if the damage was less than 50 to 75% of the assessed value of the property. And then if it was more than 50 to 75%, which we agreed we had to set a finite number, it said you could not build back. We didn't want to be that restrictive, because the Planning Commission felt that was too restrictive. So basically what they came up with is that in two scenarios, you could have two different types of buildings that are affected. Let's take a big old Victorian down on Main Street. And I'm not suggesting that any of those buildings are non-conforming, but for the purposes so everybody can envision it. If there was a fire at a Victorian that required a lot of extensive renovation within the Victorian, but a structural engineer said the structure itself it was still structurally sound, then they could build back that non-conforming structure in that footprint, as long as they got all the required building permits, and they had to bring the building up to code at that point. So if it had to have sprinklers or ADA accessibility, whatever, it would have to be brought up to code, but it could be built in the same footprint. However, if you had a structure that when it got gutted out and a structural engineer said, I'm sorry, but that structure can't hold that building anymore, and it can't be repaired in place, then you were not automatically permitted to build back in the same footprint. Furthermore, if it burned to the ground, you would have to get a structural engineer to at least confirm that the existing foundation could support the structure, because typically when buildings burn down, they don't burn the concrete or block foundation. But as you know, we have a lot of older houses that if you go in the basement, you can see the farm stone already falling out of the wall. And so what this is saying is that you have to get a structural engineer to confirm that the foundation can be built upon, and you still need to get a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals to be able to build. And that gives the Board of Appeals the ability to do a case-by-case review, meaning, let's say that that Victorian was among 10 other Victorians down there, and there's no public hazard being created by it being rebuilt. It might be viewed as a hardship to say that they can't build to the same height and do the same footprint that all the other properties down there are already able to build. So all we're doing is making sure that we bring buildings into compliance, but do it reasonably. So that is the last significant change in the zoning code. So I wanted to make sure you understood this. We'll put this out for advertisement for a public hearing that will most likely take place on the first meeting in February, and then we'll have further discussion and consideration of it.
Thank you, Town Administrator. Does anyone have any questions? Moving forward into citizens' input, would anyone like to speak this evening? Anyone?
Bueller?
Staff reports, Town Administrator.
No report.
Chief.
I've given you the police blotter in the last 2 weeks here. Sorry. I provided the board with the police blotter. In the last 2 week period, we've had 80 calls for service. We've put in 4,800 miles of patrol within the town now. That's pretty good for a 1 square mile town. There has been no significant trends at this point. One thing I did want to cover is on the 10th of January, it was the anniversary of the passing of one of our members of the town hall staff, Dan Stickney. For that anniversary, he was posthumously promoted to sergeant. The mayor and commissioners provided a proclamation to his family announcing that, and they also declared that day to be Dan Stickney Day. You're going to see more coming with that, because in that process there was a dedication of the conference room to his memory. As you all know, Dan was an integral part of the community, loved or hated. He affected a lot of people, and to this day I still have people call me crying because they needed to talk to him. We continue to keep his family in our thoughts and prayers, and that's my report.
Thank you, Chief. Assistant Town Administrator.
I have really, the only thing I have is you do have financials, so you can take those home and review them. If you have any questions, let me know. But other than that, no report.
All right, moving forward into the mayor's report. My report's pretty brief. With a new year comes new growth on our Main Street. We were honored to join in the ribbon cutting of Garden Girl, along with 3 other businesses that will occupy their second floor, including Bell's Acres and the Potted Page. Beautiful restoration of that building has been done. It certainly takes a huge investment. We were honored to be able to receive help from DHCD in helping them restore that building and bring it back to life. Yet another new business on our Main Street is a great thing. We continue to have discussions on how we are going to solve the parking issues with Main, and that's something that I look forward to continue to have with the board, along with upcoming updates to our community building, along with some aesthetic updates to Main Street. Cecil Night in Annapolis was recently. The Cecil County Chamber of Commerce hosted a wonderful evening. Myself, Commissioner Kleiner, Commissioner Warnick, Town Administrator Bonneberger, and Chief Peterson were all in attendance. The Lieutenant Governor of the state made some really great comments regarding our community. And we continue to shine bright in Cecil County. But it was a wonderful evening, and we thank the Lieutenant Governor for taking the time to come and spotlight our work with DHCD and Commerce, along with the other great things that are happening here in our town. The month of January, 9 years ago, it's hard to believe that we proclaimed it Support Our Police Month. The lights are blue in front of Town Hall. If you see one of our police officers, please thank them for their service. I also wanted to hope that the chief will get our guys together and celebrate with maybe a luncheon or something in their honor. In previous years, we had done a breakfast, but I think this year we'll try to do a luncheon together or something. That is the end of my report. Moving forward into commissioner comments. Commissioner Kleiner.
I just have a brief report. Very excited for the opening of Garden Girl and the Potted Page in Bell's Acres. There are also pop-up shops that rotate over the weekends in the other bedroom upstairs in the house, and I highly recommend every business in there, and I hope that you all come. And it was especially moving to me to see so many from the town who were there for the opening. The community support was wonderful, and I'm really, really grateful for it. So thank you to the community for that. And definitely a highlight of the Cecil Night was hearing Lieutenant Governor Miller mention these businesses and her fondness for our town. So thank you to the mayor and for that relationship building there, and just excited for what the new year brings.
Thank you. Commissioner Warnick.
I have no report, thank you.
Commissioner Pearson.
Yes, I just want to reemphasize what Chief Peterson said about Officer Stickney. It's hard to believe it's been a year. I also want to remind people that when it snows, you have 24 hours to clear your sidewalks. These last 2 small incidents has left a kind of bitter taste because there were a lot of sidewalks that were not cleared within 24. In fact, some of them days afterwards have not been cleared. Just want to remind people, you must clean your sidewalk after 24 hours. That's the end of my report.
Commissioner.
May I?
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier, and I wanted to add on. Along Pearl Street, where we've been battling the issues with the crosswalks and the vehicle speeds coming east on Pearl, we have installed some crosswalk signs to make motoring traffic aware that they are crosswalks in front of the middle school. So you should be using a lot of prudence when you come into those intersections. We also have moved closer to the speed enforcement cameras that are going to go into that area. So hopefully that'll be here soon to help those people that won't change their behavior, change it.
Thank you, Chief. Commissioner Pearson, I also wanted to see if you wanted to highlight, I know that we have a community input session tomorrow evening. Did you want to mention that in regards to
I'm
the
sorry,
mushroom facility?
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, did you want to cover the community input session that's being hosted regarding the mushroom house tomorrow evening?
Oh, yes. The MDE has cited West Coast Mushrooms. They have been fined already, and they are required to have a public hearing to meet the public. That will take place tomorrow evening. It's starting at 6 o'clock at the fire company hall. Their representation will be from lawyers. I know some people already I've given information to that will be attending that. I unfortunately will not be able to attend it, but please, if you have a problem with the mushroom house, please come to the meeting tomorrow night so that the lawyers and hopefully the management will hear our complaints about that smell. Thank you, Mayor, for reminding me.
Thank you, Commissioner Pearson. Just once again, the community input session is being hosted by MDE and the lawyers of West Coast Mushrooms. This is something that affects our community while we are unable to really have a voice or a place to hinder the odor itself. I mean, we all struggle with folks complaining about the smell, and because that facility is outside our town limits, we really rely on the state and the county to help us monitor that smell in that location. On the agenda, you'll see the Boarding of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission schedule along with town events and upcoming holidays, the trash, recycling, and yard waste schedule as well. Is there anything else to come before the board this evening? Hearing none, can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting
Aye.
adjourned.